This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
This is the American Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater. These seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Today's seminar is on producing. It is one of a series that we bring each spring and each fall. The series consists of the performance in which the noted and not so noted yet, but experienced and knowledgeable people of the theater contribute their services to the wing to talk about how it is to work in the theater. We do one on the play script and the director, and that is exactly what it says of the playwright and the director working together. Today's program and today's panel consists of a wonderful producing team that has been around for a long, long time, and it is on the production. It is exactly that. It is what it is to be a producer, how you produce, what the responsibilities of each person is in the production team. This is but one of the American Theater Wing's all-year-round programs. Most people say, oh, the American Theater Wing, that's the Tony Awards. Well, the Tony is a very important part of our program. However, for 364 days in the year, we bring theater. We bring theater to Saturday Theater for Children, in which youngsters are able to see and make a commitment to go to see theater in their own schools. We bring theater to hospitals and institutions, to people who otherwise would not be able to see or be part of the magic of live theater. And then there are these seminars, perhaps one of the most unique and practical seminars that I can think of on the theater. The audience is made up of students, drama students of the theater, as well as professionals. And I will now turn it over to Brendan Gill, who is moderator and chairman of the board. It is not yet chairman of the board, but member of the board of directors of the American Theater Wing, and Jean Dalrymple, member of the board of the American Theater Wing. And they, in turn, will introduce this wonderful producing team that we have up here today. Thank you very much.
This should be a particularly useful seminar, because what a producer is and how a show is produced is truly mysterious. Even to people who go to the theater all the time, as I do, none of us really knows that out in the reviewing world or in the world of the audience itself, how many people are involved in putting together a show, and how the duties can be all brought together and meshed together, and something actually turn up, as it frequently does, in a miraculous fashion at the very date it was announced as having come true. I want to introduce the group here before we engage in a pell-mell discussion. And on my right is Richard Seader, who's a veteran general manager and who has often worked with Gottlieb, our producer. Right next to me is Milly Schoenbaum of the firm of Salters and Ruskin, which is one of the agents that I'm always telephoning, asking special favors. I'm saying, I can't go on Tuesday night, can I go on Wednesday night? And Milly is always saying, yes, that's fine, I'll see you at the box office. So they're very helpful in making sure that everybody is happy. At my far left is the young man who was so hungry and eating that bagel, is Morton Gottlieb, our celebrated producer. He would be perfectly prepared to be shipwrecked on any desert island. Out of his pockets would come food and drink ad lib. He is among the hits that Morty has had over the years are Sleuth, Same Time Next Year, Tribute, and a romantic comedy. I remember when I reviewed Same Time Next Year, and I said that it would run forever, and I didn't mean that as a compliment. And it will run forever somewhere on Earth. Next to Morty is Dasha Epstein, who is a vice president of the American Theater Wing, who is herself a producer, has worked with Morty in the past, and has received Tony Awards for Ain't Misbehavin', Children of a Lesser God, a very distinguished member of this theatrical profession of ours. And next to Jean Dalrymple, my co-host, we have Mitch Douglas, who is a literary agent who represents Bill C. Davis, the playwright and author of Dancing in the End Zone, which is a play that is coming to Broadway. And so here we have all these different people, all of whom are involved in a family of effort, of enterprise, and the person about whom it all has to revolve, once we admit that the playwright is the key to everything, is the producer. And I think we should begin, in this case, with Morty, and he can tell us, first of all, what he thinks a producer is.
Well, the producer is the man who has to sit there and wait for trouble. And he's the resident psychiatrist, the resident critic. Many people think that the producer is the man who raises the money. Well, that's one of his responsibilities. But that's not the prime responsibility. In a way, money is easy to get. There's always money somewhere out there that can finance a play. I'd like to talk not about musicals, because I don't do musicals. I don't do revivals, and I don't do musicals, and I just try to do new plays from scratch. So what a producer for a play does is sit around, once he's decided to do the play, once he's gotten the general manager to start negotiating for the terms for the play with the author's agent, and works out various other things, and the producer discusses a lot of that with him. The producer's job is to see that all the creative people are most creative and can push themselves as far as possible to work out their creativity and get it on the stage. But on the other hand, there is one thing further that I think is the most important function of the producer, and that's to arrange the opening night party and see that he can make the best deal possible with one of the smart places in town and get as many celebs as possible there and get as much of the press there so they can photograph the celebs and get it into the papers and the magazines as quickly as possible.
One of the things, interestingly enough, that I know least about is the opening night party.
That's right. You've missed a world. What a book you could have written. Because you don't go to the opening nights, or if you do, you rush back to the typewriter and start thinking out your reviews. You've missed one of the most exciting parts of the theater.
But also, we're not invited because it may be that we'll be the skeleton
Not
of
at
the
all.
feast.
I have John Simon at all my opening night parties.
That doesn't alter my opinion of the skeleton at a feast.
Actually, Brendan, when I was a child and I was first taken to the theater and saw certain people rush out at the end of the play, I thought to myself, my heavens, they hate that play. Yeah. And then, of course, when I got older and became a producer, I realized, I know where they're going. So the whole...
Well, you know why they rush out, why the press rush out? Because they want to get a taxi as quickly as possible before anybody else.
Actually, the theater opening nights get earlier and earlier, and sometimes people wonder about that, and that is in part a function of the fact that newspapers go to bed earlier and earlier. The unions have arranged the hours in a different fashion. In the old days, you could write a review very late into the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning if you had to, but not anymore. So the daily press has to work hard to get their reviews, and Frank Rich does have to go back to the Times and write very rapidly.
Well, that's why he goes a day or two earlier, and the others go a day or two
makes it
earlier
much
than
better.
the opening night.
That's one of the things that is interesting about producing that has changed in just the last few years, that instead of the horror of opening night, the horror for the actors, the tension, the terrible fear that everybody is out there passing judgment, it is much nicer as it has been arranged, and as Milly helps to arrange these days, that there are often for plays 3 or 4 alternative dates, and so the reviewers go on different days, and the cast isn't in that terrible pitch of nervousness that it would likely to have been on the official opening night in the past when everybody was gathered there. And it is true, like a Frank Rich will often go a day or so ahead of time, have a much better opportunity to write a serious review than in the old-fashioned way of racing back to the office. Weekly magazine reviewers like me have the privilege of having days in which to think about what we're going to say. Often we do. And my own experience in that respect is, however, that one doesn't like a play, that the longer one puts off writing the review, the angrier about the play one gets. One doesn't gain sympathy for the failed work, one loses sympathy for the failed
I don't agree with you about the opening night, you see, because I feel that the glamour of the theater, and when I say glamour, it means not just the allure of maybe people going in dinner jackets, which I don't approve, and I don't allow people to come to the opening nights in dinner jackets. because then the audience are looking at each other instead of on the stage. But I feel that the whole larger-than-life excitement of the Broadway theater has gone downhill since the critics started not coming to the opening night.
Also, they don't see as good productions or performances at previews as they would see on opening night.
Even though the
with all
Well,
the
sometimes they
energy
may,
and
but
excitement.
that's
They
beside
may,
the
but
Very
even though the
seldom.
production is frozen, there's an up and a down
Yes.
that comes in. And to come to a matinee, which some of the critics are doing now, I think is all wrong. And I think that they're now staging it for the convenience of the critics, and it could go a week before it opens, too, if you're going to do
Well,
that.
it
call
is
your
true,
attention-
excuse me, that sometimes those matinees, they may be a better performance that the actors are giving, because sometimes at a matinee audience there is a kind of enthusiasm that is not necessarily spelled out in terms of the volume of the applause or the amount of the laughter at the matinee. But I just feel that we have lost a sense, as I say, of larger-than-life excitement
Event.
about a whole event that
Used to be
used
an
to
event.
happen in the American theater, particularly the Broadway theater, when you had an opening night, when you led towards the opening night. It isn't just a matter of the quality of the text, which you can sense no matter when you see it, or you can read it for that matter, or the quality of the performance. It is true that very often the performances on opening night were not the greatest performances, although I can tell you about a couple of shows that were dying, and finally the electricity of the opening night was such that it overwhelmed the press. They gave, particularly one musical, which I may be talked into mentioning later, got rave reviews, and then subsequently it went downhill and eventually dribbled away after a number of months. But it was considered a hit because it got rave reviews, but it wasn't a very good show.
I call your attention to the fact, however, that the people who say they believe in opening night, none of them is an actor. None of them is going through that particular thing. I
That's
think
true.
when you talk to actors, you hear a different story.
I don't think
No,
The actors I talk to say different things from the actors
The
you talk
larger-than-life stars, I know,
Brendan,
love the opening
opening
I can
night.
speak
There's a-
from personal experience because
Yes.
my wife happens to be
Richard Seader.
an actress. And I find that she feels the same as what Morton was just saying, that they work and they aim for a particular moment,
Yes.
as an athlete does in training. And when they get to that moment, it's diffused now. It can be 4 or 5 moments, none of which can be consistently of the same level. So one critic may see a better performance, another critic may see a lesser performance.
But that's good,
and
not
effective.
bad. I think that's better that way.
No.
That's more honest to the material, to the
it's
playwright.
not good for the theater.
Brendan, no, but also there's an anticipation about opening night and the audience reaction. There's a magic about that evening, and the actors react to that magic because I have seen a performance not on a pitch where it's usually supposed to be because of a certain reaction of an audience that they're not really with it. So an opening night, when that audience walks in, and there is that magic about it, and the actors sense it, they feel it, and they do, I think, their performance is
your tyrannical colleague to your left contradicts himself because he wants a great event, and then he says he won't let people wear evening dress. One of the reasons we don't have events like that anymore, either the Metropolitan Opera or anywhere else, is because people come in blue jeans.
Well, I agree with you about that. One of the reasons I don't allow I don't want the evening dress is that, as you were saying before, the opening nights get earlier and earlier and earlier,
Yes.
and you have to send people home to get into their dinner clothes at 4 in the afternoon to get to the theater so that the deadlines for television and some papers can be met earlier, and people have to get to the theater at 6:15 in their dinner clothes. And that's one of the reasons that I say don't bother with black tie for the opening night, because it then puts the audience for the opening night on this hyperactivity, which has nothing to do with what's going to be on the stage. It has to do with them getting from the office or wherever they are or to the beauty parlor and back, and to get into the clothes and get to Midtown. And the show hasn't even started, and they're exhausted.
Well, I'm glad I'm in charge here because everybody on this platform disagrees with me. What a fortunate situation I'm in. Yes, by all, Milly Schoenbaum.
As far as lessening the tension for the performers, I think that this increases the tension in a sense because they don't have one opening, they have 4 openings or 5 openings, and there is terrific anxiety. There are some performers who will say, "Don't tell me who's coming, I don't want to know who's coming." There are others will say, I have to know who's coming. And as a press agent, you're stuck in between. What if you tell someone who's coming, and they tell the person who said, I don't want to know? Where does that leave you?
Yeah.
So everybody is under this tremendous, it's not a one-night tension. You're under tension from the minute the critics start coming. And so are the performers, and so is the producer.
And so are the
and so am I,
critics.
and
Yeah.
so are the critics.
Well, that,
Yeah.
now it's all the more wonderful because everybody disagrees with me, but everybody disagrees with each other. On the one hand,
I
we're all
don't agree.
no, because you're saying the tension before, now somebody else is saying no, that they can't get up to that pitch of tension because it's dissipated.
No,
Well,
yes, it is.
Richard just said one thing,
It
you
is.
said
Well,
another.
all right.
No,
Instead
Brendan,
of-
you're not
instead of
listening.
saying-
You're not
instead-
listening, Brendan.
Yeah, instead
No,
of saying,
Brendan.
let me put it this way. I think what Richard meant was the kind of a tension, the kind of tension where the adrenaline works positively. I'm talking about anxiety.
Medical, now we're getting some medical
which goes,
testimony.
Is there a doctor in the house?
you know, which continues over a number of days.
Before
Dr.
we leave this,
Schoenbaum.
I'd like to suggest one other thing. Why would we not wait a couple of days, as they do in England, for example, before a review comes out? Why not
I
let
mean, in
that
France.
woman-
In
and
England,
France.
they don't. In England,
They do most of it. They're now
they-
starting to do the
I
next
can,
day.
Well-
I can tell
But
you
wouldn't it
why.
be better if we had that same
let the press
time?
agents.
Everybody would
Like
drop
that,
dead.
right.
From,
The New York Times considers an opening an event, and they want it covered immediately, and they set the terms.
But they go to
It
press,
is
as
a
Brendan
producer.
was
But
saying
couldn't the
before.
producers?
In recent years, their schedule is such they go to press at a certain time. The review has to be in. And the minute the paper is labeled with a certain date, even though the paper can come out at 10:15 at night and be on the newsstands with the next day's date on it, it has to have the review for the play that opened that evening. And sometimes you can run over to the Times and get the paper at intermission time of the opening night, and you can pass them out at intermission, and people can decide whether they want to go back in to see the second half or whether they got a good review.
Now, Mitch, you were going to say something.
I was going to say there's another psychological point to the opening night, too, because until that opening night comes, you're still in the working process. The playwright's still, maybe I can get that last change in, and the actors are aiming for something. You hit the opening night, and it's truly frozen. You can't go backward in time then. And that gives you a goal to shoot for, too, that opening night performance. It's the kind of electric tension, wonderful opening night you hope it will be.
I want to give an example of that. With the original production of The King and I, an hour and a half before the audience were let in, and when the cast were out for their food, so to speak, Gertrude Lawrence, the star of The King and I, and John Van Druten, the director, were still potchkeying around on the stage to hype a sense of an exit of certain scenes. Now, don't forget, The King and I did not get good reviews, the original production, and they thought it was going to fold. And Brooks Atkinson said, let's face it here and now, The King and I is not as good as South Pacific. And they didn't know what was going to happen, and they were struggling out of town, and right up until an hour and a half before the audience came into the house, the author and the director and the star was still trying to do something with the show as an example of what goes on.
I was involved with one of those productions that had a totally new opening put in the night before the official opening. It was a funny thing happens on the way to the forum.
That's
We
right.
struggled
Tonight.
manfully
Yes.
through the
Yeah.
tryouts with great difficulty. Rehearsed this opening number for a week before it was ever put in, was put in the night before the opening, actually magically transformed that show, and if the critics had been in 2 and 3 nights before, they would never have seen it.
Comedy Tonight.
Richard-
Was that the
Yes.
number? Comedy
Yes,
Tonight.
Comedy Tonight.
Yes.
Written at the instigation of Jerry Robbins,
That's
who
correct.
was brought in as a favor to George Abbott and Hal Prince and Steve Sondheim, and came in and said, you need a new opening, you need something else. And Steve sat down and virtually overnight wrote Comedy Tonight, and it was...
That's correct.
Richard, tell us, because I think you have one of the most mysterious tasks in the theater. What is a general manager?
A general manager is many things, too. As Morton told you what a producer was like, a general manager has basically the function of structuring the finances of the production, building the budgets with the approval of the producer. And fortunately, when you're working with a producer like Morton Gottlieb, he knows, so it's very helpful to the general manager. General manager will negotiate the contracts for all the creative people, for the actors, put together the crews, try to work out arrangements for theaters in New York and out of town if you choose to go out of town. In other words, he is really the major domo of the finances from every aspect, always in conjunction with the producer. But a wise producer who trusts his general manager will leave him that freedom to do what he has to do.
Then you have to work, say, with a lawyer about contracts and all that.
On lawyers and
And
accountants.
agents?
Yes,
Agents.
Mitch Douglas and I have
But
crossed
we don't
swords a few
use it with the
times.
lawyers because you have to pay them extra.
I see.
If the lawyers
Morty is famous for
Yes.
having a
General
very
manager
shrewd
knows.
judge of a penny and a nickel and a
Absolutely.
dime. And maybe that's why you live as a producer and thrive as a producer while other producers vanish from the scene altogether. Who knows?
Well, it's the only thing I know how to do.
But so
And
it is-
sometimes
He does it with love and creativity, too, which a
And
lot of
you meet
producers are
daily?
incapable of.
When a play is underway, when you once started, then you do and the producer meet every day or every couple of days?
Oh, surely.
or-
We're generally in touch all the time.
And how early on would you be the person would you hire Milly? Would you hire the press agent, or who does that?
Well, that's something usually that the producer is the one who picks his press agent as he picks his general
Because I was
manager.
wondering, how early do all these pickings take place? Actually, Mitch comes into the picture earliest of all,
That's
I
right,
suppose,
yeah.
is representing
Yeah.
the off.
Well, we could
playwright.
take it in that sequence if you.
Well, no, why do we do that, Mitch? You're the farthest removed before the producer
Yep,
or anything.
yep.
You represent the playwright,
Correct, correct.
and who knows that the playwright has a play that is capable of being looked at?
Well, the story is, once upon a time, I picked up the phone and I said to Morty Gottlieb, there is a reading of a play called Dancing in the End Zone.
It was called Touchdown.
It was called Touchdowns, and I would like you to see it. And he said, I don't go to readings. I think it imposes a certain interpretation that I may not want to accept, and I would like to read the play. He did that. Now, I've been sending Morty plays for 10 years now. I want you to know this. And he always calls and he says, now listen, this is a very good play. I like this about it, but I don't want to produce it. And then he's very specific as to why. This case, the phone rings, and he says, I read this play, and I want to do it. And that starts the ball rolling. Then we start negotiating a deal for a playwright. We discuss the way Morton sees the show, the way he would like to do it. I then take his belief in the play and his way of wanting to do it to the playwright, put them in a room together and see if we all agree, and if we strike a collaboration, then we negotiate a deal. And then work together every step of the way.
And then had you represented Bill Davis in his previous?
I represented
Mass
Bill
Appeal?
from the very beginning, his first show in New York, Mass Appeal.
Yeah. And how did he come to you?
He was brought to me by a very wonderful actress-director by the name of Geraldine Fitzgerald. She said, I have a play I want you to read, and I did and loved it. And it was a collaboration.
She was here yesterday on
Oh,
our
that's
seminar.
terrific, yeah.
But and Milo O'Shea, by the way, I saw last evening, so I felt very much in the family situation.
And
But-
Geraldine, in turn, had seen Mass Appeal in upstate New York and taken an interest, and
Yeah.
that's the way
And
Bill's
you-
career started.
And you represent many playwrights, more playwrights than novelists? Or
I
short stories?
represent both. My background is theater. I did a playwriting major once and taught theater on a college level. I started in books, and then some years ago got involved with a playwright by the name of Tennessee Williams, and found myself in theater again. And now it's about 50-50. I represent as many playwrights as I represent book writers.
Now, is it more anguish to representing a playwright, or can't you tell?
Oh, I wouldn't call any of it anguish, because hopefully it's always a great deal of fun. I mean, if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. It takes more time to represent
say
playwrights.
complex rather than
it's more
anguish.
it's more complex, because writing a book is an isolated job. You sit in a room and you write your book. When you're dealing with playwrights, you're dealing with directors and actors and producers and a whole host of problems that might arise out of the creative process.
Now, when Morty said, I want to do this play, he hadn't yet met Bill Davis.
Actually,
No, I knew Bill Davis
Oh, you
on
did?
He
a
had.
semi-social basis
I see.
because he lives
I wonder
near
what
me
a
up in
semi-social
Connecticut.
basis can be.
Well, I knew him as a professional writer
You half shake
who
hands.
happens to live near me in Connecticut.
I see. Well said. So you were eager to do the play, and then you made. Was it a matter of weeks before you made the deal, or days, or?
Months and months, a year, I would say. But,
Then why?
No, but you mean by the time I signed the contract?
Yeah, why would it
Because
take
I
a
was
year?
chiseling away for a
Sure was.
Morty was looking for
I will
2 people in the
testify.
cast. Morty very famous, right, by having 2 people in the play.
We were really negotiating about the opening night party.
How many relatives he was allowed?
Yes.
Yeah, but in fact, much of that time was taken up with negotiation or with casting or
Everything. See, because I feel the author and the author's agent should know everything that's going on. And I always say there are no secrets in the theater. You know, it's the smallest community there is. And everybody knows everything. So therefore, I might as well let the author and the author's representative know everything before they hear about it in the John at ICM.
And we hear.
To hear about.
Pardon?
What is there to hear about in this?
That suddenly in the middle of the night I think, well, how would what's-her-name be? And then I might call what's-her-name's agent and say, what's she doing now? Is she making a movie or television? So before I call what's-her-name's agent, I say, how do you feel about what's-her-name?
Nice.
when do you get in touch with Richard Seader if you know you want him for your general manager?
Oh, you talk all the time. You see, for many years, Dick and I shared, I had an office. Helen Bonfils, whom you remember, was my partner, and we did a number of plays, Enter Laughing Through Sleuth, and then she died. And we had offices in the Palace Theater building, and Dick and I were in the office. So there we were.
So, and then in the case of this play, Dancing in the End Zone, how early did he come into that first year? You already had
yes, yeah. I don't know what.
Not
Several months
Not
ago.
on a formal basis, but on and off. I knew what was going on, and happily he'd done his work well and wore Mitch Douglas out. So when I came in to negotiate, it wasn't that
Hard
much
to wear
resistance.
out, by the way.
And then what about, at what point, ordinarily in most plays, if not in this one, when do you choose your director?
Well, very often I like to get the director involved as soon as possible. But a couple of the directors that we wanted to have direct it way on had conflicts, and so we didn't get them. And then somehow you fall into the circumstance. Now, one of the directors we wanted to direct it and loved the play was Mel Bernhardt. But he couldn't do it. It was in conflict. Our schedule was in conflict with another play that he was doing. He was trying to work out his life. Could he overlap and do both? So he decided there was no sense. It wasn't fair to either production. So he wasn't chosen. He wasn't the director. And a couple of other things happened along the way where there was one director who then did withdraw from the show. And when we did a production of this play, Dancing in the End Zone, at the Coconut Grove Playhouse in Florida. That's owned by the state of Florida. The artistic director is Jose Ferrer, and Jose, as we know, is one of the most exciting, memorable, wonderful guys. I mean, both as an actor, a director, and even a producer. At one point, Jose Ferrer had 3 big hits on Broadway that he had produced. One he had directed and acted in, another he had directed while he was acting in one of them. I mean, Joe Ferrer's experience and talent is endless. Well, Joe runs the Coconut Grove Playhouse, and he had read a copy of the play a year ago. I don't know whether Mitch sent it to him or somehow Joe got it, and he'd always expressed interest in this play by Bill C. Davis. And Bill said, I want to do the play in an atmosphere somewhere away from New York where I can see the production there on the stage under non-pressure. So we said, we all talked to Joe, and Joe said, yeah, let's do it as part of my season. And it was scheduled for a month ago, and it was done down there. Now, something happened along the way when we were in rehearsal, and the director who was directing it had to leave, and Joe Ferrer, luckily, was free he was acting in Life with Father at that point. And he was just finishing with Life with Father, and he took over the direction and worked everything marvelously. And we did the production for 4 weeks down at the Coconut Grove Playhouse. And Joe and Bill Davis, working together constantly, were able to prune the play, reorganize certain scenes. You see, it's a fascinating play that is not conventional in its structure at all and in the way the story is told. But at any rate, they worked on the play, and then at a certain point in the 3rd week, the end of the 3rd week of the production down there, Joe said, listen, we were talking about what about going on to New York, as we had scheduled the play for New York. And he felt it wasn't quite reaching its potential. Very good. And by the way, Coconut Grove Playhouse sold out in its fourth week down there, so that meant word of mouth had to have been tremendous. And they have a very good subscription program there, but there are a lot of seats that are not sold on subscription. So the play was getting better and better and better and better. And he said, he was pointing out about its potential was even greater. And I called Mel Bernhardt, whose play that was in conflict months before was not coming to New York, and he rushed down and with... Pardon? What's that?
Yeah, but continue.
And Mel Bernhardt and with Bill Davis and Joe Ferrer gave a fresh point of view as to what was happening and how much better the text was getting and from the original version he had read. And he had certain ideas about what to do. And we decided, led by the author, Bill C. Davis, the former would-have-been director and future director, Mel Bernhardt, and Joe Ferrer, to let's not push this production together because it has such great potential. Why do a play that's 80% there? That phrase, 80%, was told to me by an important executive and vice president of one of the major movie studios who had seen the play, and the studios are interested in the movies, in the movie rights of this play. Why settle for 80% when you have one of the most talented writers alive today for the theater, who I think Bill Davis is going to be one of the most important playwrights whose future plays are going to be up there with the majors someday. And why settle for 80% when they could go back to the drawing board with Mel's fresh point of view and Bill's desire to improve and rewrite? I've come across very few playwrights in my life who love rewriting, and Bill C. Davis is not opposed to rewriting if the thoughts sink in properly. So we decided not to open in a few days in New York, but to postpone the production and let the author sit down and take advantage of all these creative thoughts that have been developing in the last
the value of being out of town?
That's right.
Going
And
out of town.
that's very true.
And I think that's the important thing, and that's something that we ought to discuss here
Sure.
now, is
It's
going out
also-
of
Could I
town.
ask something?
Sure.
Did you have to pay for the production, or was it all paid for by
No,
Coconut
that was taken
Grove?
by the Coconut Grove, like one of
I
their
thought
productions.
so.
You see,
That's Marty.
but one of the things is that this past season, they had a marvelous group of productions. They started with Light Up the Sky with some wonderful actors. And
Well, we've got to get on.
what's that?
Let's go on to what
Oh,
we're talking
but I
about.
just want to answer, see, and they've been asked why they don't do new plays, and they do new plays once a year or so. They did Paul Zindel play a year ago. So they wanted to do a new play in addition to doing Life with Father, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum in Canada Hudson.
Dasha?
I think it sort of brings us to the point what Morty did out of town, which was, I think, marvelous, and the exposure that you have. Lots of people don't have that opportunity to do it, and I think that would bring us into the question of workshops, which is happening today, and I think a very beneficial point in the theater for a producer, because the economical end of taking a show out of town, as we used to do years ago, taking it to Boston, taking it to Chicago, and working on a show there before you bring it into New York is no longer viable because of the high expenses and the problems that you have taking out a show out of town is alleviated by the the cost of doing a workshop in New York, which is still relatively expensive, but you get a look at the show, you get a feel for the show, and when a show is in workshop, they stay in workshop for a while, take the show out of workshop, and then go and work on them again. So in essence, what Morty is saying is being done not in workshop here in New York at Michael Bennett's studio or another place, but being done out of town.
Joe Stein, yesterday, if you remember, said that a workshop production of a new musical would cost $250,000.
Isn't that amazing? For a workshop.
Workshop.
Amazing.
We thought, I would have thought 20,000 or something.
No, it's amazing.
That's what it used to cost.
Well, when you consider that an off-Broadway production these days has to be capitalized for $300,000.
Yeah.
That's bonds, deposits, contingencies, and a
When
preparation
you
for
talk
the
about
advertising
that, when
campaign.
you just don't, where do the bonds, deposits, and all of those things go in? Give me a percentage. Give me
Oh,
an
let the
idea.
general manager talk.
All right.
Well, your bonds, also, it varies from show to show. But I would say, Morty can, off the top of my head, at least 30% of your budget goes into those returnable items, which are theater deposits, deposits with all the unions, advances against royalties to the creative
It's
people.
more than 30%, because out of the $300,000 capitalization of this production, more than $100,000 was in bonds to the theater, deposits with the unions and vice versa, and the contingency in case you have a nervous hit and you want to stay alive. And Dick and I can talk about a nervous hit that we once did called The Killing of Sister George, which got unanimous pans, less one. Yet it ran through the season, won a Tony Award for its star as the best performance of the year, had a movie sale as a result of it, and the money still comes in. I toured for a year with Claire Trevor.
And paid off in 4.5 weeks.
That's right.
Yeah.
But Dick, when Morty is saying $300,000 as a budget
That's-
for the show, that is off-Broadway, and I think we have to clarify.
Well, we started
what it
off with that,
costs, right,
Dasha, if you
exactly.
were listening.
No,
But
But
the
the
thing
point
is,
is, it's
the cost of
$300,000 for off-Broadway, and more than $100,000 is in these things that are not being spent before you get the curtain up.
But to take that same show, and I just did a show off-Broadway called Weekend Near Madison, which I did down at the Astor Place Theater, and producing on Broadway, the differences, which I learned are tremendous of producing on Broadway and off-Broadway, as far as costs are concerned, bonds are concerned, dealing with equity, all of the costs more than double when you take a show, or triple even when you take a show, the same show, and say take it and put it on Broadway.
Instead of doing it off,
Yeah.
yes.
Did your Children of a Lesser God, did that grow as a play in something like the way Morty's been talking about it?
Well, Children of a Lesser God was done at the Amundsen out in California
Mark
first,
Taper.
at the
And
Mark
then-
Taper,
The Mark
Gordon
Taper.
David,
And then
that's
it
right,
kept-
the Mark Taper.
And then
And
did it change as it came east?
we
Is that-
had some changes, there were some changes that were put into the play that were
Very few.
done when we brought it here on Broadway. But basically, it stayed the same. We saw it out there. I co-produced that.
Because when we were talking with Lanford Wilson yesterday about how closely he works with Marshall Mason, for example, and how that really is a collaborative effort that produces
Right, well,
great,
Gordon-
and brings that potential, when you say 80%, when Lanford Wilson gets a play up to 90%, it is because he's been working so closely with all those comrades. They're all comrades.
Right, well, Gordon Davidson directed it in California at the Mark Taper, and then, of course, he came back here and did
It
it over
really
here with us,
seems like
too.
an ideal that was talked about yesterday on the pre-production talks and planning and being together that goes on with Marshall Mason and Lanford. We can't afford to do that unless you have almost a national theater or a repertory theater. But that seems to be the ideal.
But
And
you get
that's-
to work with you get to work with friends. There's an awful lot of trust gets built up. So
Well,
that you
truly.
would-
Well, what I was saying before about this being a very small business and everybody knows everything, I don't like working necessarily with people whom I don't know, because I want them to know that when I'm yelling at them, I'm not yelling at them, I'm yelling at the world.
That's
Right?
That's the easiest cop-out I ever
After
heard in my
working with
life.
Morty, sometimes he
When
yells
you're
and I
yelling
throw
at them,
my
you're
arms.
yelling at them, Morty, and you know it.
I'm yelling at myself.
I think we're going to get to Milly. I don't know whether we have time.
Isabel, I just wanted to bring up one other situation. Morty, who has the most wonderful following group of people who have been investors of Morty's for a long time, and they're his friends again, and close friends, and believe in him, which every producer hopes to have. The advantage of doing a workshop in New York, as opposed to doing a play in Florida at the Coconut Grove, when you do a workshop, I think when the workshop is ready or practically ready, you invite people to come down to see it. So if a show is costing $3 million, $4 million to do it, and a producer is looking for investors, they certainly ask those people to come to take a look at the show, and hopefully they will have them as future investors or investors in the show. So it works that way also.
But also, I think there's a danger there, because people come out and say, well, I saw
Oh,
it,
yes.
and,
That's right.
it needs a lot of work.
It's the same
As soon
as
as
letting an
somebody
investor
says
read a
that.
script.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think
Because
so.
most people don't know how to read scripts, including producers and people who work in the theater. Not everybody knows how to take the words and project, especially a script that has not been honed down, that has not run its course in preparation. And you have the script there. And similarly, when they go to a workshop, they can't project what's going to be pruned and what's going to be developed. And don't forget, some of it's compromise, and some of the casting is compromise.
Before we take a break, I just have to
break?
say one more thing on the uniqueness of Morty Gottlieb. I think he is the only producer that handed out to the investors on the opening night party They're royalty checks.
Not royalty, they're
They're
investment.
investment
Pay them
checks.
back
They're
in
investment checks.
investment.
On the opening
Investors don't
night
get
party.
royalty.
On the opening night party of tribute. I think it was the most extraordinary thing that has ever happened. We're now going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue.
I think we're too soon for a break, are we not?
Well,
What kind of break?
well, we'll
It's
still
5 to
talk.
12.
We're still talking now. Tim
We
says,
have five- we
I
have
was
five.
just told there that we're taking 5 minutes, that we should take
Is
our
that for
break
union
now.
reasons?
No, it's
Continue talking, Morty. Had you ever done that before? Was that
Taking
the
a
first
break?
time? No.
paid back investments on
Paid
opening
back
night.
No,
investors
it's the
on
only
opening night?
time, I think, in the Broadway theatrical history that the investors were paid their money back on opening night. Some shows, there was one Julie Harris play back about 25 years ago where they toured and made the money back, but didn't return the investment. They had recouped the investment. I think they came to me, or maybe they didn't come to me. I can't remember the detail of which the play was. There have now and then been shows that may have recouped its money, but couldn't return it yet because they still had some of the money tied up in the bonds and deposits and contingencies.
And then
How did you
very
make
often,
opening
Was
night
it because
party?
you made profits out of town?
Yeah,
Was that
a number of things.
And
I
you
try to
had-
keep the costs down when you're out of town, and the Bernard Slade, who wrote Tribute, took a royalty of $750 a week, which is part of the Dramatists Guild agreement if the author wants to abide by the basic terms of the Dramatists Guild agreement. And Jack Lemmon took certain reductions, and we hammered away at the theaters at the Colonial in Boston and the Royal Alexandra in Toronto. We played 7.5 weeks out of town, including the previews pre-opening in Boston. We figured we're going to do well. Let's try to do very well. And the reviews were great in both the cities, and we sold out for the 4 weeks at the Royal Alex in Toronto, and we recouped a lot of profit. Now, in addition to that, we made enough profit to pay back the investors, but we also made a pre-production movie deal, but we didn't get the money until like 3 weeks after we had opened. So I knew, in addition to having made enough profit to pay back the investors, and even a little more, and we could pay them back, we would get our share of $1 million coming along
On a
later.
movie deal, do you have to have a certain amount of performances?
Yes, you have
How
to
many?
run, well, let Mitch take it away, because it does vary according to different
right.
contracts.
It varies, but traditionally under Dramatists Guild, you have to run 21 fully paid performances before you become completely vested. That is the
21 in
producer.
New York.
21 in New York. 21 in New York before the producer gets his full share.
That includes previews.
Includes
Yes.
previews.
That
No,
doesn't-
it's
10,
usually
10,
limited to 10.
10
previews.
Sometimes
10.
10 previews is the maximum of the 21.
The one thing we didn't ask is how early on did Milly get into the picture? When
Before I've read the play.
You've always worked with
I'm
Morty?
always in touch with
I think we
Morty.
have to get back to Milly afterwards.
All right.
Now, we can just relax for a minute or two, and please don't
See
go away.
what,
We'll
Millie, you
come right
caused
back on.
relaxation.
Just say my name and everybody leaves.
You can take, unpin yourself and get out of these lines. Why do we have this break?
We are continuing the American Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. I want to get back to our discussion with Morton Gottlieb and the group of people that you see sitting here now on what it is to be a producer, what goes into the production, and how it is to work in the theater from the producer's point of view. Morty and Brendan Gill, I think was at the, Brendan, our co-moderator, was about to ask Milly on what her role was as public relations and publicist in the theater. Would you like to continue that?
Milly? Doctor, well-known world authority on stress, strain, fear, and trembling. Tell us how you work and what you do in your work.
I try to stay out of the way so I don't get blamed for a lot of things.
That's
No.
Army talk.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's not true. What I try to do is, first of all, working with Morty as a press agent is very easy on one hand because Morty knows about being a press agent. So he'll call up and give me a lot of good ideas. On the other hand, he wants to know why I haven't gotten other ideas, a lot of ideas, also about first night parties.
Yeah.
But I think what's important about being a press agent for a play is the way the play is presented. and to make sure that the way the play is presented is the way the author would like it presented, the way the director would like it presented, the way the producer would like it presented, so that we all are working on the same project. So,
and among other things, perfectly legitimately, you seek to get stories in newspapers.
Seek to get
You've
story-
got to stir up interest in this play months
Absolutely.
in advance. How early would be the first notice, say, of Dancing in the End Zone? Would that have come into? You must keep a scrapbook. Did you have a reference to that?
no,
in the
I
play?
well,
6 months ago.
See, sometimes it depends. Sometimes you announce it 6 months in advance. Sometimes you wait. It
Deputy
varies
Salesman
on the
we heard about
production.
for 2 years.
That's right. Many shows you hear about for 5 years,
Yeah.
and suddenly you say, "Oh, that'll never happen." Suddenly it happens, or they drift away. But Morty's plays generally happen, or always happen, in my experience. And yet it depends on when you send out the release. When you have, I think, your key people signed, is when you send out your first release. And what you try to do is send a release out with as much information. We call it a reader, so that the press,
call it?
a reader, so that the press getting it knows a little of the description of the play, a little about the people that have already been signed, short biographical notes, and whatever real data you have about the theater, the projected opening night, previews, etc., prices.
How do you get that piece of the Sunday paper on the front page of the drama section?
Well, you start by going breakfast and praying.
And do you think of the writer? Do you sometimes know something?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes there's a writer who will call you
There was a
and
famous
say,
president.
I'm very interested in doing this.
There was a famous press agent in the old days named Dick Maney,
Oh,
who spent
yes.
much of his time writing pieces under the names of various actors and actresses. He was
Well-
outrageous. And he knew words in the English language that no actor or actress living knew, but they would appear under the person's name unchallengeably.
Yes, he's quite a legend.
But that was
Mr.
an
Maney.
old-fashioned fellow.
Yes.
That doesn't happen much, I gather,
No.
anymore.
No.
But
no.
you do. It is nice to get that Sunday piece.
One wants it.
And who chooses Al Hirschfeld? Who says Al? is
The
gonna-
Times.
And you court the Times, hoping that Al will be given that assignment.
yeah.
No. And how do you court the Times?
Oh, you can't really court the
You court the Times by
you
drawing-
try to present what you think are
Ideas that they'll
readable
like.
material, you know,
Yes.
or you suggest a certain angle and a point of view of a play.
And Al will go out of town. He draws his caricatures
Yeah.
sometimes if you're in Philadelphia or Boston or
Well,
whatever.
we have now and then had Al Hirschfeld do the cover. I mean, we hired him to do the drawing of Jack Lemmon for Tribute. I hired him to do, Dick and I did, when we did Lovers by Brian Friel with Art Carney. And we had him draw Art Carney. And actually what he did with Art Carney was he took an old drawing that he had of Art Carney and just aged it. And we discussed this with him. We said, just take that old one and put one line. And there is this marvelous profile of Art Carney on the cover and on a poster and everything of Lovers. And I think he used it again. I think Art used it again. And all.
In case anybody in the audience could possibly not know, Al Hirschfeld is the greatest living caricaturist and has been for 60 years, an absolute master.
More than caricaturist, he's the greatest historian of the American theater. If you look at those books of his, it tells you everything about 60 years of the American theater, just looking at those drawings of his and telling you.
And his
what's-
daughter's name is always
Yes,
Yes.
Nina. Nina 4 times, 5 times.
There is a wonderful story. Can we divert just to Al Hirschfeld a second? I'm sorry. There's, I can't say anything short. So
I know.
Now, somebody like Steve Sondheim or whoever it was played a game one time where he had all Al Hirschfeld drawings on the wall, and at the party you had to say who was and what play this was and who the stars were, and then you had a hand in your ballot. And Henry Gettle, who now runs TDF, said there was this drawing of a play called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, starring Frederick March and Florence Eldridge. And there was a thing of a coffin and the characters drawn by Al Hirschfeld. And Hank Gettle said, now, Who was in the coffin? I want that question asked. Nobody got it. It was Hank Gettle, who was the second assistant stage manager on the show, and he was in the coffin, which was drawn by Al Hirschfeld.
A great man. Well, you've never been in the coffin, I assume. What is the most extreme task you've
Not
ever
that
had
I'm
to
aware
perform?
of. Maybe in another life I will.
Can I interrupt and say something about Dick Seader, who's been here as a general manager? But Dick Seader is also a producer, and produced Taking My Turn, one of the most marvelous shows that, you know, and it ran for many months, and
Well,
he's a
that's the
producer of other
off-Broadway.
things.
That was off-Broadway.
Yes.
Yeah, well, in a middle house.
Would you like to say the difference between middle house? Let's get into that. What is a middle house?
Well, a middle house in the union sense is any theater that's over 299 seats and under 500 seats. And the middle house is another step up in expense as well, because you then get into higher pay scales for the actors, the rents are higher, union conditions are usually a little more stringent, you have more unions to deal with, not as many as on Broadway, but you do have that. And so the expense of those shows are more expensive than the pure off-Broadway shows that are between 199 seats and 299 seats. But I must tell you, Morton, that just within a year after I produced Taking My Turn, which was a musical, which is usually much more expensive than straight plays, we were budgeted at $300,000 and came in at $229,000. If I had to do it now again, I'd need another $100,000 just a year later to do the very same show.
Oh, that's amazing how fast that.
Yeah.
We were talking, Dasha and I, about something which she thinks is probably unprecedented, which was that Night Mother, Marsha Norman's play, came to Broadway in the smallest house on Broadway. Probably ought not to have been on Broadway because it could run for a long, long time off Broadway. But I think there was a matter of pride involved in wanting to get on Broadway. In any event, perhaps for the first time in history, that play has gone from Broadway to off-Broadway, and I think probably will have a whole new life.
Yes,
Right.
run another year.
Maybe
Yes.
that's a healthy
Well,
sign that we can do both, that we
I
can go backward as well as forward in terms of up and down and
I'm-
expense.
I'm very curious to see that. Of course, there's always the lure of having a play open off Broadway and then bringing it onto Broadway. And there are a lot of plays, I feel, that should really stay off Broadway because it's a different type of audience, and maybe there is an advantage to some plays staying off Broadway and running on and on and on. I am very curious to see what's going to happen. I had thought about doing that with Master Harold and the Boys, which was a success, and yet I think it would have reached another type of an audience had we moved that play to off-Broadway. Fortunately, now we're doing extremely well on the road, and it's still a very, very strong play. But I see now where a lot of plays that were in the theater are even coming back. There's a play, well, Stephen Sondheim's Pacific Overtures is playing at a little church up in the Church of the Heavenly Rest, I believe, uptown.
A big
And
church, but a
big
little
church, yes,
production.
but a small production. Thank you, Brendan. And now what's happening, I know there's a lot of talk of moving that play from the church to find a home for it. Well, it won't probably go to Broadway, but here is a play that opened, was a wonderful play, closed, did not get the reviews that it should have received, and now it will probably be coming back. So I think there's a whole different
It should
scope
go to the
in
Promenade,
looking
with the
to.
Promenade, which is on Broadway in 76th and has been really redone wonderfully. And if Pacific Overtures were there, the way that theater is structured, it would enhance the nature of that production.
But it's an
Have an
idea.
off-Broadway theater like that.
What is the advantage of the middle theater? Do you like it
Well,
since it's been introduced into the contract?
oh, absolutely. It really deals with shows that are a little bit too expensive to run in 299-seat houses. You don't have the commercial appeal to be able to go into a Broadway situation. So it serves a function in that it allows you to do a play still a lot less expensively than on Broadway, but a little bit more expensively than in the normal off-Broadway situation.
But Marty, could they afford to put that in the Promenade with so many people up there? It's not
No, but
costing
the
anything.
production doesn't have all that many people. How many does the
That's small.
Pacific
It
Overtures?
must have at least 12.
Oh, it has that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it does
so
have
you-
that.
you
Well,
can't
but
afford
the
12
Promenade
people
has
off-Broadway.
381 seats or 391 seats, something like that, which is not enough, meaning it's not 499, and it has the same wage scales as a 499-seat theater, but it's more than 299. But I just meant from the creative standpoint, that wonderful thrust stage that the Promenade has, this marvelous semi-amphitheater feeling. That's where Godspell played for all those years. And
How could the little theaters on Theater Row with
well, those are something else. Because
we'll
those,
talk about them. How could they be feasible?
Dick, what you
Well,
did
they're-
play.
no, I didn't do any on the 42nd Street, but they are really workshop theaters. They're under 100 seats, classified by Actors Equity as workshop theaters, and they're there for very small productions that are still finding their way. It's a step above a workshop, but this is what is known as showcase
Or even
situation.
with the Beckett Rockabye, that's as big a theater as that ought to be
That
in.
it-
It's
that
one
it-
person
yes, the
playing
arc
two
is-
tiny little,
right.
three little
And
things.
yet you,
There are situations.
excuse me, you
most
look
of
at
those-
Sam Shepard's play, Fool
Yeah.
for Love, which is in a small theater at the Douglas
That's right.
Fairbanks,
Right.
I believe, and it's going on and on and on. Now, no one has picked up that play and moved it to a larger theater. It needs the confines, it needs the intimacy of that
That's a
type of theater.
199-seat house, that
Right.
particular.
The
But it's-
Fantastics has been running, what,
Right.
21 years now?
Exactly.
More than that.
25
Yeah,
years.
that's right.
And that's because it's a nice tiny little
But
theater.
was it-
99 seats. I
Jerry
think.
Orbach began as a very young man, now he's
Alan
gray-haired.
Rita
You
Gardner.
see, in some ways, with the change of attitude about nothing, it's not an insult anymore
Yeah,
to be
that's
seen
important.
in a non-Broadway theater or even in a 100-seat theater, or that Sam Shepard, one of the leading, most talented writers in America today, is not compelled to have to be seen in a 1,000-seat theater. And this is a whole new concept that's going on, not only from the standpoint of the creative people, but the public as well. And it's all dictated by the economics. And if we want to go back, say, 40 years, many of the plays that are part of the history and the literature of the American theater may never have run more than 4 weeks on Theater Guild subscription in the old days, but that we look upon them as having been enormously successful plays. In those days, as you know, if a play or if a show ran 100 performances, it was a hit, meaning 12 weeks. Well, nothing can get its money back anymore in 12 weeks.
I think John
So-
Barrymore's Hamlet only ran about a few weeks
That's
comparatively.
right.
Yeah, it was the best Hamlet we've ever seen.
And they were able to get their money back, and they may have toured a bit. And the attitude of the public then was that you went to see what you felt like seeing, and not everybody rushed to see it, you see. And the play could have got, let's talk only about plays or new plays, the play could have got its money back, run a while, maybe it toured for a few months afterwards, and everybody was happy with it, and they went on to the next production. Today, because a play cannot reach the lowest common denominator audience, it can't stay alive. And what you were saying about Night Mother, years ago, wouldn't have run as long as it did on Broadway now, but it would have got its money back. I don't know if it got its money back on Broadway, but in today's concept, with the dictates of the economics, just the cost of advertising in the New York Times or in all the papers with ABCs, it's out of proportion to what the production can stand. So therefore, some plays that cannot reach the lowest common denominator audience should not go to Broadway, where everybody makes money except the author and the producer and the investors.
Now, tell me one thing I forgot to ask you. You were at Yale as a young man, as an undergraduate. You had an enormous private income. You were always very wealthy, and that's why you became a producer. Is that right?
That's part of it. I became a producer because at the age of 5, I said I wanted to be a producer. Because my uncle Jake Oppenheimer owned the Lyric Theater on 42nd Street, which is known as the most beautiful theater in New York, and is going to come back as a legit theater. And if you look at the facade of that theater on the 43rd Street side, you'll see one of the most exciting looking theaters, and if you go inside too. And Uncle Jake had booked into that theater shows like the Marx Brothers and the Coconuts and Rio Rita and Cole Porter's 50 Million Frenchmen and Frimmel's The Three Musketeers, which they're reviving. And I used to sit in the box office before the show started. We'd go every Wednesday and Saturday
little
matinee
ice.
at the age of 4, and sit in the manager's office during intermission and in Groucho Marx's dressing room after the show, or go to see the George White scandals and sit in Harry Richmond's dressing room. And I met Ziegfeld and George White and Earl Carroll at their various shows and said I wanted to be a producer. Very simple.
Incurable infection.
So at Yale, because I wanted to be a Broadway producer, I founded the Yale Film Society.
All right, Morty, keep going. Then you came out of Yale, and how did you...
And then I became a press agent.
Right.
Well, no, actually, I first worked at Columbia Pictures Story Department. Then I was a critic on the Bayonne Facts, a drama critic, and would get free passes to shows. You see, that's the best.
Better than Perth Amboy, I suppose.
That's right. And then I became a press agent, and I took the job as a press agent because I figured this is how I can get one foot in the door. And I worked for Dorothy Ross, who years later became my press agent.
How does one get one foot in the door now?
Now.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
I started working with Morty, and he was my advisor and my teacher
Well, how
on
many
same
people out
time
there
next
ask me
year.
for
So,
All right, we'll get back to that. But it is much harder today. to get
But
that
now
one foot in the door.
among producers, you do have to have a firm grasp of what can be kindly called the facts of life economically, and you're quite celebrated. You're almost a legend in being
I went
careful
from being a
about
press
money.
agent. I used that as a way of pushing my way into becoming a manager. And I became a company manager. I was the first one to get into the Association of Theatrical Press Agents and Managers under a new clause called the New Blood Clause, which doesn't exist anymore, where but I'd already functioned, well, I got to go back just a bit. I was Gertrude Lawrence's press agent, and through her met Dick Aldrich, her husband. They ran the Cape Playhouse at Dennis. When it reopened after World War II in '46, I went to work there. But Dick also got me, and I was doing free publicity work for Theater Incorporated when it first got started, publicizing, promoting them, the first active non-profit tax-exempt organization in America. ANTA was founded before them but didn't do anything, but Theater Inc. did something right away, meaning Gertrude Lawrence's production of Pygmalion, followed by the first Old Vic visit to America, with Olivier doing his Oedipus and Ralph Richardson doing Falstaff and all that. And I promoted the Old Vic and Theater Incorporated. I wasn't the union press agent. Bill Fields was the union press agent. And incidentally, I tried to get the New York Times to spell Vic from Old Vic without a V-I-C-K at the end. So I couldn't get the New York Times to leave out the K.
You're lucky they didn't put an S on.
I know. Anyway, so from publicity, I became a manager, and then became a company manager, then became a general manager for Gilbert Miller and various others, and the American Shakespeare Festival Theater, always looking for the day I'd become a producer.
Yeah.
And I became a producer when my very good friend Marlon Brando said, listen, why don't you become a producer? So I left Gilbert Miller, and we did a tour of Arms and the Man, which he starred in, and I paid him $125 a week, and Billy Redfield $1,000 a week. And Marlon was a giant star at that point, and that's how I became a producer. Did a couple of other things, went back to general managing, and then met Helen Bonfils, whom I'd known before in my Gilbert Miller days. I was her general manager for a bit. She said, look, why don't you produce a show I know you want to produce? I'll put up all the money for it. We did Enter Laughing, and it ran a year.
And is it true that you prefer two character plays with one set for the
No, I Enter Laughing, which had a revolving stage, two wagons, and 19 equity.
But then how did you learn this new economics that you are reputed to practice?
I do want to tell you something, that when you do a play with two people, you're usually going to pay them in toto more than you would 10, 15 actors at minimum. Yes, Isabel, what would you like to say?
I want to ask Milly, how do you feel about the media? Do you feel that it is worth going into television? Do you have to go into television on a show? Do you allocate monies for that, and so much for advertising and so much for television? And how much is that?
I think if you have a musical, you are practically 100% obliged to have a television commercial, because those people watch television a lot. The latest survey was 7 hours a day.
What was the musical that was made by, was it Pippin?
The Wiz.
Pippin.
Pippin was famously made
I was the
by-
press agent on
Oh, you
Pippin,
were?
yeah.
Well, apparently
The
the TV commercial
commercial
was so powerful.
Pippin did not get great notices,
No.
but that TV
And when was the commercial? How many months after you had opened? Months after.
Yes, about
Long-
7 or 8 months
Yeah,
after.
when the commercial, it was
Yes.
nervously
Yes,
going
Fosse
on. Did a whole
created that commercial.
That's right.
It wasn't even a part of the show.
Yeah.
Didn't they then put that into the show later?
No.
Is that
was
part
never
of,
put into the
is
show.
that part of your planning with Dick and with you at the
You
beginning
mean
of
a
the...
TV commercial? I don't
No,
think
an
TV
ad,
commercials
an ad
for plays.
schedule.
No,
An ad
an ad
schedule.
schedule.
But for a play, it's a little different than for a musical because it takes a certain kind of play, maybe something like Dracula, where you have, you know, something very identifiable where a TV commercial would work very well. But I think by and large for a play, it is very difficult, very, very difficult to get an effective television commercial.
It's a strange one for Awake and Sing, because the idea that a radio commercial at any rate is that this family is like your own family, and you're supposed to find this dreadful family heartwarming. I would think anything would be guaranteed to keep you away from the play. If people told me that was like my family.
You know what a play has to do to get on television? It has to have Milly Schoenbaum thinking up stunts. We'll tell you about stunts we pulled for same time next year in romantic comedy, and we were on the TV news all the time with these stunts.
But you were rolling at that time. I'm talking
True.
about the very beginning.
No, I'm talking about, yes, that's right.
Name a stunt. What do you mean
All
by
right.
stunt?
Okay, we had Sandy Dennis. Sandy Dennis is a cat person. She has 38 cats. So we worked out an auction in front of the theater under the marquee on a matinee day with the, what was the
It
organization?
was more than an auction.
What was the
It
organization?
the New York Humane Society.
That's right, okay. And
terrible.
there they were
wonderful.
with all these cats on display for a week in the lobby of the theater, and people could come and decide how much they wanted to pay for these cats to get them off the streets and out of the Humane Society. And it broke all the TV news.
But then you got cat food also,
That's
remember?
Then a year later, we had Hope Lang in it, and she had a dog, so we did it with dogs. A year later, we had
How
Betsy
about
Palmer.
Betsy Palmer with the
Morty.
Salvation Army
That's
and
what I
her
was gonna
playing
get
the
to.
trombone?
That's right.
Morty,
Yep.
how many tickets did all of that sell?
Well, we ran 4 years. We don't know, but it was
You did
cheaper
a lot.
than having a TV
so that
commercial.
publicity and that public relations is important.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's still
We're
a lot
now-
of cat
I
food
want to
and
say
dog
one
food in
thing.
his
What you were
office.
asking
Can you
Milly
say
before,
one-
before we get these questions, this will be an answer to some.
Will it be a short?
It's no. Packaging and marketing is what we're talking about at that point. And one of a producer's functions, and his main function, takes place from the day after the play is opened. And he has to have a point of view of packaging and marketing the show. What do you sell? When I was the general manager for Gigi with Audrey Hepburn, The Unknown Girl, in 1951, she did not get really good reviews, but we had to go through with our plan to make her a star and put her name over the title, and we packaged and marketed this unknown 20-year-old girl, Audrey Hepburn, and made her a star. We forgot about Anita Luce and Colette. We just concentrated on her. And Milly
Think about-
Schoenbaum is an expert on packaging and marketing.
Think about one other question. What is most important to you? I know the Times is, but how do you work around the Times if you've
Liz
gotten-
Smith's column.
Yeah. Okay,
The
keep going.
photos
and
on
what
the-
about television reviews? Where do they
Everything
stand?
counts
They
today.
all
Everything. You can't
They're
do
all
without
part of it.
anything.
Okay, all right. We're going now to
Word of
open
mouth.
this
Yeah.
two
Word of mouth.
questions.
Wonderful.
And please come up quickly and tell us who your question is going to be addressed to.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Robert Ader. I'm an actor, writer, and soon-to-be producer. The question is to the producers or anyone else on the panel who wants to answer it. It's a two-part question. First of all, how does one structure a backers audition for a non-musical? And if you are a first-time producer and you don't have rich friends, where do you find potential investors?
Milly, answer that.
I said they're both very good questions.
Thank
I
you.
don't know where you find people with money because, you know, with money that would, also you have to be the kind of person to approach somebody with a very positive attitude toward what you're presenting. Some people are very good at that. I hope you are.
Well, Alex Cohn recently took an ad in Playbill, a full-page ad looking for investors.
Yeah, and Hal Prince, with his great success in the past, always had trouble getting investors, I'm told. He would have as
Well,
many
sometimes he did, and he just...
100 people would have to be found. To
Well,
put
we have 117 on Dancing in the End Zone.
You do.
Also, in the
Are they the same ones that you've had before? Do they come back
Most
to you
of
with
them.
each
Some are
production?
new ones. Some of the old ones have died. I'm not
Also,
saying that, you
in the
know,
Wall Street Journal, there was an ad,
Yeah.
and also
Yeah.
Variety and the trade magazines have little notices of where a production or a backer's audition is going to be.
Every doctor and radiologist in New York has extra money. Every orthodontist is back of
Thank you.
pornographic
The
film.
first part of the question is also interests me, of how do you structure a backer's audition for a non-musical? In
I
other
don't
words,
have
do you do
backers auditions.
the entire play? Do you have a reading, or should you have a performance, or which do you think
I
is better?
think the worst thing is to have a reading, as I was saying before, because what happens is the stage manager is saying she picks up the telephone, and one of the actors there was good and picks up the phone, and so then he says she puts down the phone. The readings, I think, can ruin everything. If I think what you try to do is make sure you have a play that you think will appeal to certain people who have money, or get a star, or get a director who has some kind of reputation. But on the important thing is to have the play, to get
To the agent.
an agent who has a play that you feel says something different, and says something theatrical, and says something that pertains to the world today, and make sure it's not a play that presents a problem the audience knows before it walks into the theater and leaves the theater having got nowhere with no point of view. You see, the problem with plays today is that the playwrights are not philosophers, and they're not poets. They don't give you one little shaft of light at the end of the tunnel, so you walk out of the theater knowing how you can improve your life.
Thanks.
They tell you what you
Would you
know
come
before
right
you
up,
know it.
please?
Hi, my name is Tim Archie. My question's for Richard Seader. What are the skills needed to be a good general manager?
Skills needed to be a good general manager? Many, many skills. First of all, I think you have to have a sense of business, number one, of finance, number two, very strongly an ability to get along with people. I think that's very, very important, because you have to be very diplomatic along the way without antagonizing people in adversary situations. But basically, I think you really have to have some kind of background in business affairs.
Great, thank you.
Is there a union?
There is indeed a union for company managers as press agents. It's the same union, Association of Theatrical Press Agents.
How do you get into that?
Well, there is an apprentice program. Each year they bring in a number of people who are submitted by producers or general managers. And the other way is if they organize theaters that have not been under union jurisdiction, they take the people who are operating those theaters in with them.
Thank you.
My name is Mel Friedman, playwright and librettist, and I'd like to direct this question to Dasha Epstein. Do you and other Broadway producers go out of town to regional theaters to see plays for possible Broadway production?
Very often. The play that I did, Weekend Near Madison, came from Louisville and the festival there, and I spent a lot of time doing that, and also going to workshops and to readings that are in this vicinity and out of town. I'm on my way up to Yale to see a play that...
Tell that story about Louisville and the Haven yesterday.
Well, I think they're two separate stories, Brendan, but I went down to Louisville last year and saw a play that I liked very much. And at that particular moment, it hit me. I wanted to do that play. I was moved emotionally. I felt involved with the play. It was called Weekend Near Madison. I was leaving the day after, go over to London to see something over there. And when I saw the play, I went directly to I did not know who the agent was. I did not know the writer, nor did I know the director. All I knew was that I liked what I had seen. I went directly to them, sat down and talked to them and said, I love your play. I want to do it. I said, here is $2,000. I'm on my way tomorrow. I don't know what you're going to do with it. I trusted them. I said, I'll see you when I come back. Give me the name of your agent. I'll call her tomorrow, tell her what I did, and let's talk. If you want to hold it and you get other offers, whatever it may be, I'd like to go with the play. I went to London. I came back a week later, and on my desk were these wonderful reviews for the play and about 5 or 6 other letters from different various producers who wanted to do the play with me. At that point, I called up. I said, congratulations to the author and to the director. Congratulations. I think it's wonderful, the reviews that you've gotten. Now, where do I stand? I know you have a lot of different offers. They said, well, you had the guts to go with your conviction and you like the play. We want to go with you. Well, I did the play here in New York. I did it off-Broadway, which was the first play I did off-Broadway. The reviews there were spectacular. It opened here. We had to close the play, unfortunately, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. The reviews were completely different here. I don't think there was that much of a change in the play, but it is the difference in locale, in location. Something sometimes works out of town, sometimes gets great reviews, changes when it comes here to New York. You cannot be guaranteed that if you get a good review in regional or out-of-town reviews. But yes, your answer to go into it is, I do go. For example, I called Yale the other day. Lloyd Richards who did Master Harold and the boys who directed that, and Athol Fugard's play Master Harold, has done a new play called Ma Rainey, which was reviewed in the Times yesterday, a brilliant review. I called up, I said, gee, I'd love to come see that play over the weekend. I'll be up in the country. They said, Dasha, there are about 30 producers coming to New York. So as soon as something gets a terrific review, it's a security. It's every producer wants to. It's scary to take risks today.
Why I connected the two stories is because they prove that producers are sheep, just like all the rest
No,
of
they
us.
do go out. That's true. And it takes a lot of guts to take something new and to try to do it.
My name is Neil Weiss, and I'm a director. I have a question for Mitchell Douglas and Dasha Epstein. What qualities do you look for before you give an okay or a blessing to a given director?
To a director?
To a director. There's one you'd hire or one you'd advise your client to work with.
Keep in mind that the producer hires. What I looked for is a shared vision, the same vision for the production of the play. I want to be sure that the playwright and the director are compatible.
I think that's very important, and that was proven yesterday when we had directors and writers here. I think it's very difficult to work with a writer who has one feeling about a play or a different approach to a play. The interpretation, the work has to be a joint effort, and I always look for that, hope for that.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Miller, and I was wondering, Mr. Gottlieb, could you expand a bit more on the company aspect? You actually answered my question about beginnings, but that company is sort of where I am now.
What
do you have
company do you mean? The
you
legal
mentioned,
company?
No, when you said you started with or you moved up to a certain stage, you had a company. Did that include actors, writers, directors, producers?
He said a company manager. He said he
company
went from
company
press
manager.
agent.
No, that's what we were talking about, a member of the union.
Mm-hmm.
I had been a press agent, as I was saying, but I didn't want to be a press agent.
Mm-hmm.
I only did it as a way of getting both feet in the door and getting producers and other people who were in the Broadway theater to know me on a professional basis so that I could convince them I was responsible enough to become a manager. And as I was saying, I met Gertrude Lawrence and her husband, and I had worked with them, and then Dick Aldrich hired me to be the general manager at the Cape Playhouse and hired me to be a company manager on a play of Theater Incorporated. And I got into the union as a company manager of a play there. But he wouldn't have known me if I hadn't been a press agent and worked for them, and he had confidence in me to move what I considered up to being a company manager, and then became a general manager along later.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Alan Jordan, and as a established author of business and a beginning playwright, I'm kind of interested in knowing what characteristics make it apparent that a play is producible, and I thought I'd just leave it an open, directed question.
Well, Morty has already answered that pretty well, I think.
There is one thing I didn't say apropos that. I'm in the theater for myself, personally and primarily. In other words, this is what I want to do. This is what I've chosen to do. And when I read a play, I can usually decide by the time I've finished reading the play that I want to do the play. I only do one play at a time, and I do very few in the course of a lifetime or a decade. I do maybe an average of 2 every 3 years. And some of them have run for many years, or you try to promote them into running longer than they should. But what I do is I decide on what I feel like devoting my life to at a particular time. And so I have no set rules about the subject matter necessarily, except that I like, and I'm always looking for a play that deals with the corridors of power. You don't find many plays anymore. You find more movies that may deal with the corridors of power, to steal a title from C.P. Snow. And when I only select what I feel like devoting my emotion, my time, and whatever professional activity I may have at a particular time. It could be a serious play. Hopefully it's got humor, because I think everything should have humor. When you consider that the first act of Watch on the Rhine is more laughs than 3 Men and a Horse, you know, everything should have humor. And Macbeth has laughs. But I only pick what I feel like working on at a particular time, and hopefully it's going to say something in a way that deals with our lives in the world today. And hopefully it has a plot, and a beginning, middle, and end, and character development.
I also...
Can I ask a question?
Can I answer
go on.
part of this also? When I see a play, I have to feel an involvement. I have to feel moved. There is an emotional impact, whether it's fear, or whether it's laughter, or whether it's whatever emotion will grip me, I will say, all right, I am completely, totally involved in that. And I remember seeing Whose Life Is It Anyway, which was a play I was involved in, and everybody said to me, Dasha, you're crazy, because it's a subject matter that is not going to appeal to a lot of people. And I saw that play with Tom Conti in London, and we had a struggle with equity to get Tom Conti to do the play over here. And the impact, the emotional impact, watching that audience react, took your breath away. There was silence. There was absolutely a total involvement. And I think if you can get that, even if you get somebody, there's an energy that comes out of it. And that's what I personally look for in a play.
Thank you.
I only have a few seconds for a vita and inquiry, so I'll make it kind of snappy. Norm W. Berg is the name. I'm an ex-filmmaker doing audiovisual theater. I worked with Marshall McLuhan in the 60s and early 70s. And the question, the intention is to go around to educational institutions, the universities and colleges, with multimedia theater. The question is, I guess the inquiry is, who is a topical packager and marketer for this application in this kind of theater?
Marketer and packager of
multimedia theater?
Yeah, I'm not concerned with so much money, in fact. Can one go, in fact, into that situation with just transportation and expenses?
I think you people know more about
That's a large question.
Exactly.
Multimedia theater, a concept of using audiovisual for stage designing.
What was that musical at St. James that ran?
I don't know that there is a particular organization that would specialize in that kind of booking.
I think that really should be something to be discussed after the program, because it's such depth on it. Perhaps we can find out for you, and the people on the panel might be able to help you with it. But I don't think off the top of their heads, this is not a group that would be familiar with it at this point. But it'll certainly help if we can afterwards.
Isabel, I had one question I wanted to ask Morty, which I think is very interesting to me, at least, and that is, how in the world would you dare to say that you would only do new plays, given that 99% of all that we have in all of the arts is what has been done in the past, but you just don't believe in doing revivals?
Well, there are no subsidiary rights.
Jerry Herman on the seminar last fall said that he would like to see a two-character musical.
There have been some.
Yeah, but I thought of you immediately. Have you ever thought of that? Because
I do.
No,
but has Morty ever thought of doing it?
What, I do? Oh, no, well, people have come to us about doing a musical at the same time, and I always thought it was too soon, and I don't know that I want it. Well, people have submitted whole scores of songs for a musical at the same time. It's the musical of Sleuth we have to do.
And one other. You have another question? Quickly.
I'm Barbara Barondess, and I have a new nonprofit foundation for the performing arts. My question is, since the nonprofit theater groups in the last 10 years have so often fed the Broadway theater with new plays, actors, and directors, wouldn't it be an advantage for Broadway producers to help a little to support the nonprofit?
Yes, they do, by taking them to Broadway and then paying royalties back and giving those authors...
Yes, but I don't mean that. I mean support the nonprofit theaters to exist in their experiment.
True.
It is very difficult
defeat
today,
the
particularly, to raise money for a nonprofit.
I agree with you in theory, and I think some of the Broadway producers should, but some of them need more money themselves. If you're talking about the theater owners, the Schubert Foundation does help finance.
Yes, but they usually ask you to be in operation for 3 years before.
Well, so does the government.
So does the government. So does the United States government.
The government and the
Yes,
state.
and so is the government. So for the first 3 years, you have to struggle, and if you're not lucky enough to have the money to put in yourself.
It is very tricky.
You
It's the
have to
same
beg
as
for
doing
money.
something on a commercial basis.
Yes.
Now,
Well,
I
since
do want
we're
to...
going into the 3rd year,
Yeah.
I think we'll have a chance.
Yes.
But I just wanted to know.
Well, what you have to do
can
is then
you
find some wealthy people
Thank
who
you,
would take a
Barbara.
tax deduction and give you money in the first couple of years.
Well, there
That's
you
a
go back on
beautiful
the
trick.
funding.
Thank you very much.
I could be very glib about it, and I do think that it is true that the nonprofit and institutional theaters have contributed a lot to the Broadway theater, and I think not enough. When you consider how many millions of dollars are spent throughout the country on the productions, and how many plays are done, and how many new shows and showcases
I
and
have
workshops.
to interrupt you again.
Why?
Why? Because they say that the program has to end almost now. And
Well,
I
then
have to
let me
say that
finish.
this is the American Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater, and it is but one of the American Theater Wing's year-round programs, which the Wing is possibly best known for the Tonys, but we do much more than that. We are an organization that brings theater to Saturday to school children on Saturday mornings. We bring live professional theater into hospitals. We bring the seminars here twice a year, where the most gifted and the most talented of people in the theater contribute their time and services to you, to the audience. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theater Wing. I thank you as an audience for coming, and I can't thank the panelists enough. I constantly am thanking you.
When he was a tender number,
Before